that was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed.
Ever since the beginning of time, the hypothetical question has been passed down from one generation to another, which is, why is it that the bigger Boulet doesn't just simply eat the smaller one? Well, it's time that I finally talk about the Boulet Brothers and the rise of Dragula. So pay close attention when I say, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, as we're almost about to hit 100,000 subscribers. We literally just need 2,000 more, and I think we can maybe do it before the year ends. And who knows, maybe I'll do a little surprise for you guys. You can also follow me on Twitter at GreenGayYT, or if you're on Blue Sky, you can find me at It's GreenGay, which is also the same handle as my Instagram and TikTok. Now, let's begin. As a longtime fan of Dragula, covering this franchise has been on my mind for a while. It had its super humble beginnings to now currently having 6 main seasons, 1 All-Stars, as well as a couple specials. It's achieved what many didn't think they'd be able to do, especially for a series whose direct competitor was RuPaul's Drag Race. Granted, just because they were both drag competition shows, it didn't make them rivals, but it did prove to be challenging for any upcoming TV show about drag queens to deliver a format that was as palatable as Drag Race. I mean, put yourself in the situation of the Boulet Brothers. If you wanted to create your own drag show, you can't just steal the way that RuPaul formatted her episodes and apply it to your series, because that's just a lawsuit waiting to happen. What they did instead was create something that shared some parallels to it while accentuating differences that would transform it into an entity of its own. To start off, the Boulet Brothers aren't actually brothers. They're lovers. Well, partners, I guess. Dracmorda Boulet is the taller one, and Swanthula Boulet is the smaller one. Part of what makes both of them such enigmatic personalities is because there's not really a lot of information available about them on the internet, so we don't ever get to understand who they are as humans. Instead, they consistently hold up their persona of them being the ultimate monster duo that's there to judge their contestants. Yet based on what they have shared through interviews and collaborations over this past decade, they've pretty much been each other's boy toys for quite a while now, having lived together in New York City in their younger days until deciding to move to the Los Angeles area to try to infiltrate the nightlife there too. Their main source of income was being event planners for queer parties. Although what made them different from what the other event planners were throwing is that their parties tended to be a lot more niche in taste, with the Boulets events constantly being marketed as kinky, artsy, quirky, and pervy. Surprisingly, or I guess not surprisingly depending on who's watching this video, kink parties are actually really popular among the circuit gays who are known to party all the time. Therefore, the Boulets were able to quickly find their niche within the nightlife industry. What you may not know is that a good portion of the challenges or exterminations that would take place on Dragula over the seasons was based on things that they themselves were actually doing at the parties they were hosting. Need I remind you, both of them were club kids back in the 90s. So these were individuals that weren't afraid of pushing the boundaries when it came to an audience's reaction, especially when it came to stapling things to themselves, playing with fire, or eating bugs. Now listen, if you're not a fan of Dragula, you're probably very weirded out right now and even confused as to why anyone would find this entertaining. And trust me, we'll get into the ethics of the competition itself later on in this video. Yet within these initial stages in their career, obviously it's not always easy to understand all the different types of nightlife subcultures, but from the sounds of it, part of what enamored them was just the sheer fantasy of it all. To be transported to a more polarizing world that wasn't accessible to just anyone. You needed to have the guts for it. And that's sort of what created a spark for them to be staples within the fetish scene. Although, despite them being super crazy when it came to throwing parties, there's a reason why to this day we barely know anything beyond just the basic details about their career. It's because they each highly value their privacy and make an effort to create a separation from their art in order to maintain a balanced lifestyle. It did make me wonder a lot more about who they truly are as a person. But unlike RuPaul, who on her show emphasizes the idea of a drag persona, on the other hand, the Boulet Brothers choose to keep the fantasy alive for the fans. And that's where Dragula comes in. That started off as one of the parties that they would organize as event promoters. It was particularly special to them because they focused on showcasing drag queens that were alternative, each of them with a mission to cause shock to the audience through the lens of horror. That's why throughout the early 2010s decade, there was a lot of queens that would end up winning their mini competition, including in 2014 when Valentina won herself a crown. Ultimately, in the 2 years after this, the Boulet brothers would go on to seek new horizons for what their claws could reach. By the midpoint of the 2010s decade, they had bared witness to the effect of RuPaul's Drag Race on society. For the most part, they were always pretty happy about it. Yet there was some occasions where they pointed out how there was some negatives that came from Drag Race being the only platform for drag on a large scale, since through their lens, it gave rise to random drag queens becoming icons simply for the fact of being on television, rather than putting in the work to their respective communities to reach that level of fame. Yet just like anybody else who felt the need to complain about that, it was entirely a losing battle. So why not just join in on it? In a way, one could argue that that's what gave the Boulets the incentive to seek out their own platform where they would be able to highlight drag performers that they believed were worthy of receiving the spotlight. Only there was one issue. The year was now 2016. Yeah, sure, Drag Race was now on its 8th season, but the landscape wasn't ready just yet for a series to find success just because it had drag queens in it. It's important to point out that, especially in this era when there wasn't any international franchises, along with all-star seasons being less frequent, it meant that there was a bit of a market out there in terms of a fan base that was starved for more drag content. Essentially, there was an expectation in the air that we would be seeing new independent productions to try to ride the coattails of Drag Race. Yet, that's where Dragula ends up finding its success. The only real direct correlation was that both of the shows featured drag artists with eliminations each week until ultimately crowning a winner. Yet format-wise, challenges, and even the way they record their runways or discuss the criteria for their judging was a whole different ballgame. That's what gave them a little flair at the beginning stages of their series. They didn't just come across as a Halloween special of RuPaul's Drag Race, they instead actually managed for a good portion of people to buy the fantasy of whatever it is they were trying to put together. That being said, let me not get ahead of myself. To offer you some more context about what it was like when Dragula was first bursting into the scene, when I first heard about Dragula shortly before they began airing their first season in October 2016, I was intrigued. By this point, I had already been following Drag Race for a couple of years, but I wasn't there when season 1 of RuPaul's Drag Race aired in 2009. 1, because I had never heard of it, and 2, because I was literally a kid. So when it came to Dragula, I wanted to make sure to watch the very first season just to bear witness to her history. Keep in mind, nobody knew if the series was going to be a success. For all we knew, it was only going to last for just that one season. Regardless, I and many more fans were curious to get to know the queens that they chose for the first season, but mostly to see what exactly this brand of drag had to offer us in terms of entertainment. Dragula season 1 not only had close to no budget, but it also had no actual network to back it up. Instead, they used Hey Queen's channel on YouTube as a platform to upload their episodes. It was no secret that putting this whole competition together was extremely challenging, and that this season was just going to be a pilot to show that they did have a concept for their series. It was also representative of the new era that the world had reached. For example, RuPaul couldn't find a network that wanted to approve Drag Race for almost 6 years. In the case of Dragula, the lack of networks wanting to pick up the show was able to be bypassed with YouTube, something that RuPaul would have never been able to do 10 years prior. Essentially, the world was changing, and you didn't necessarily need to be attached to a big company to pitch your series. And what better way to do it than with an audience that was starved for more drag competition content. Their first season featured a cast of 9 queens with a total of 8 episodes, 5 of them being competitive, 1 finale, 1 reunion, and 1 special where they showed bonus footage. The episodes themselves were pretty short in length. It gave off the vibe of a high school production, but that was to be expected. In a way, it fit right up their alley, since the aesthetic of the series is to be alternative, so to have the production of the series be a little cheap wasn't much of a detriment, but it would go on to drastically improve in the years ahead. Something that you might be surprised to learn is that during the first year of Dragula's introduction to the fan base, they got a lot of support from World of Wonder. I mean, nowadays, both of these franchises sort of go out of their way not to mention each other, but back then, there was a lot more camaraderie between them, like the WoW Presents channel even uploading fashion photo review episodes covering some of the Dragula queens to help promote their series. On February 20th, 2017, more than 3 months since the season started airing, the first winner of Dragula was crowned. Her name was Vander Van Odd, who won a cash prize of about $10,000 that had to be crowdfunded by the viewers, because there was not enough of a budget to guarantee an actual winning prize. Now, if you're not familiar with Vander Van Odd, she'd go on to benefit a lot from the title, giving her a small boost in terms of exposure with drag fans. It was even speculated that she'd be a shoe shoo-in to compete in one of the upcoming Drag Race main seasons, ending up on many people's wish list for season 9 and 10. Ultimately though, it didn't take long for people to realize that it didn't seem like Dragula was gonna be crossing paths with Drag Race anytime soon. Or so we thought. By season 2, Dragula had been picked up by Amazon Prime. They went from 8 episodes on season 9 to a full 10 episodes on season 2, plus a cast of 10 different queens. It premiered on October 31st, 2017, exactly 1 year after the first one. Already, there was a clear step up in production this time around, yet it still wasn't anywhere near being perfect. In terms of the competition though, they continued expanding into this mini universe they were creating for themselves within the confines of the series. People may not realize this, but in the same way a lot of challenges on Drag Race are inspired by things that RuPaul did in her career, the entire show of Dragula is based on stuff the Boulet Brothers have done throughout the history of their nightlife careers. Themes like glam rock challenges or exterminations that invoke stapling things to one's body are all gags that they've done themselves at some point in their careers. They describe their rise in drag as being super gritty, so they wanted to make sure that their contestants would be walking in the same footsteps as them. Although even beyond the competition, Dragula's choices for their guest judges stuck out from how inclusive it was. Yeah, they were bringing in some celebrities within the gay community, but we also saw them reach out to Ru girls like Alaska, Willem, or Jeremy Carey that all went on to be guest judges, even multiple times in the case of Alaska, or BIBLEGIRL, who went on to guest judge on this season. If you aren't sure who BIBLEGIRL is, you can watch this deep dive I made about her career. Who knows, it might be surprisingly entertaining to you. It'll be linked below. Anyways, this attribute of inviting fellow drag queens to their panel extended to their own contestants, with Vander Van Odd, the winner of season 1, guest judging in the finale of season 2. It was clear that the Boulets did have a lot of respect towards the queens that competed in their series, being ready to even platform them after their run to showcase their support towards them. Mind you, to this day, RuPaul still hasn't invited any former winner or alumni in general to sit down next to her at the judges panel, which isn't any shade to Ru. Instead, it's to point out how Dragula, being the much smaller niche show of the two, it subsequently invoked a feeling of community within the production. Within the next 2 years, they'd continue their partnership with Amazon Prime, even signing on to Netflix too for a little bit. Dragula season 3 started airing on August 27th, 2019. This is, in my opinion, the point where they really zoned in on what the series was, from the camera quality to the new sets that they built. Plus, they were finally somewhat known in the demographic of viewers who seek out drag queen content. Yet they were still getting completely eclipsed by RuPaul's Drag Race. Their third season is one of my personal favorite editions of Dragula, because everything about it just fell into place. They had a total of 11 contestants, featuring Landon Cider, who automatically became the first drag king to ever compete on a televised drag competition. In case you're curious, Landon's run on Dragula season 3 ultimately led her to being crowned the third winner of the franchise, leaving behind one of the most impressive runs, including Drag Race queens, just because of how undeniable it was that she had delivered among the best calibers of drag throughout the episodes. Most notably his runways that, yes, would take on a more masculine aesthetic since he is a drag king, but somehow his looks would always end up among my favorites of the night. When it comes to planning out each season, the Boulets have said that they don't cast people in their seasons with any favorites in mind. They truly do see a potential in each of them to be able to make it to the end. It's just whether or not they live up to the expectations. Like, they do have producer meetings where they all write out how they expect the elimination order to go. So there are some queens that they assume will be frontrunners, but they don't actually know until filming starts. And by the time the season's over, the elimination order they thought would happen ends up being completely different from what actually ends up happening. It was pretty cool to see them be so upfront in terms of detailing that production does have meetings over the course of the season to talk about which queens they see being able to make it far, but that ultimately they focus on being fair by judging them on what they deliver on a given week. Granted, it's pretty obvious that this happens in any reality show competition, since as a producer you have to have some idea of how things are going to play out. Yet it reminds me how RuPaul has had a lot of queens like Trixie Mattel or James Mansfield who she noted as having some of the most hilarious audition tapes ever, but that once they got to the competition, they ended up not living up to expectations and eliminated them early on. The Boulets crowning Landon Cider a drag king as the third and rightful winner of the franchise was really historic. As a side note, it'd be awesome that if Drag Race does end up having the first drag queen to compete on the American show, that they choose Landon Cider. Because trust me, she would be the perfect representative to break down that door for future contestants. By the year 2020, we were in the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. In the middle of all this, while they wouldn't go on to film a full-out season, they ended up making a documentary/competition special called Dragula Resurrection, which to me was basically their pilot for an all-stars version of Dragula, because in it, the queens were visited by the Boulets in their respective cities, where they would really be able to see the contestants show a much more personal side to them. It featured 7 queens from the first 3 seasons of the series. By the end of the 2-hour special, the winner, which was Saint the Unholy, got the prize of getting a spot in the final cast of Dragula Season 4, which would begin filming the next year. On October 19th, 2021, the 4th season of Dragula premiered, featuring another 11 contestants. Only there was a couple notable things right off the get-go. The first was that Jade Jolie from Drag Race Season 5 made her history as the first Ru girl to compete on Dragula, sort of catching many fans off guard since out of all the Ru girls that exist, Jade Jolie was sort of the one that least came to people's minds when it came to who gives off the vibes of spooky, filthy drag. Surprisingly, the Boulet Brothers have said that Jade Jolie wasn't the first Drag Race queen to audition for Dragula, but that she was the first queen that they really did see potential at succeeding in their format. What's more is that Season 4 also marked a drastic jump in budget, largely thanks to them again switching networks, going from Amazon Prime to Shudder. More importantly, the grand prize for winning the season had been blown out of the park. On Season 1, they barely managed to crowdfund $10,000 for the winner. On Season 2, they at least guaranteed the winner that production would provide them with a $10,000 prize. On Season 3, with them having the backing of Amazon Prime, they bumped it up to $25,000. But for Season 4, to the surprise of many, they were now giving out a $100,000 cash prize to whoever won the title. This was a game changer, because yes, Dragula isn't exactly the most popular series, but having such a big chunk of money attached to the crown really legitimized them in the eyes of many drag artists, making a turning point for the continuation of the franchise, where finally, after 5 years since the inception of the series, they were going to be taken a lot more seriously as a valuable platform for drag artists to compete in. Even Evie Oddly made a joke where she tweeted that because of the increase in the cash prize, she'd consider auditioning for a future season. Subsequently, Dragula then got their first ever official All-Stars with Dragula Titans, featuring 10 of the best contestants that they've had over the course of their now 4-season-long franchise. And honestly, it ended up being a really entertaining season. The only downside I would say is that something that to this day I think still affects their show is that despite Dragula perfecting itself year after year, there are a lot of instances where it feels like, let's say, a 1-hour-long episode should instead be maybe 40 minutes in length instead, because there's too many drawn out segments of the queens not really doing much aside from talking around a table, or dragging out something that really isn't that interesting to the viewer anyway. On RuPaul's Drag Race, even though there is occasionally boring scenes, they format it in such a way that it's quickly jumping to a new segment in each episode. But on Dragula, it seems that they have a hard time balancing the reality TV portion of the series with the spooky / found footage type of aesthetic that they tend to go for. By October 31st, 2023, Dragula premiered their 5th main season, after a whole 2-year gap from Season 4. At this point, they maintained Shudder as one of their networks, but also ended up joining AMC Plus as well, furthering their reach to even newer audiences. While they have been jumping around with different networks over the years, it seems that they might have finally actually found their forever home, because this year, with the airing of Dragula Season 6, they are still partnered with both Shudder and AMC respectively. As a whole, the legacy that Dragula has solidified for itself in the past 8 years has made it so that it won't be going away anytime soon. While it's true that Dragula will never reach the level of mainstream success that Drag Race has, we've seen how the series has slowly filtered itself to get to a point where maybe more audiences will feel driven to watch the show. Yet, what are your thoughts when it comes to the journey of the Boulet Brothers and building Dragula from the ground up? Are you a fan of spooky drag, or is it just not your thing? Let me know in the comments. I want to take a moment to thank my patrons. In the Elite Pink Squad, we have Matthew Burns, Gay Uncle, Sari Tish, Natasha DeLeon, Las Potitas, and Cool Gal Nan. And in the Green Squad, we have Cayman Rider Furry, Edgar Allan Pup, The Only Sean, IJS, Alicia and Chloe, Jack Beck, Not a Punch But a Keek, Captain Chaos, Bashir with the Good Beard, Galeria Gomez, Dea, Dea, Sarah G, Scarlet Rose, Boiled Peanut, Kimberly Marin, Max Whale, and Olivia Marr. If you'd like to see your name on the screen, you can support me on Patreon. The link will be in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like this video and comment below to help me with the algorithm. And I'll see you guys next time.